In this video, I want to show you how to apply value using graphite and colored pencils in order to indicate that there is a light source coming from someplace, and teach you how to determine where shadows would appear and where the lighter areas would appear, and how to make those values with graphite and colored pencils. So in my beginning art class, we have just done a series of videos where they've learned how to draw a few different scenes using 1 and 2 point perspective. And I want them to be able to shade or color those in order to indicate that light is coming from a specific location. So this is a tutorial just to show you how to do that so that you can apply it to one of your drawings. So in an earlier video, we did how to draw boxes using 1 point perspective. So we're going to use that drawing to practice. Right now I have several different materials. So I have my drawing, I have a scrap piece of paper, and I'll tell you what that's for later. I have a blending stump. If you don't have a blending stump, a Q-tip can work well too. I have several different colors of colored pencils and a colorless blender. In my art classroom, I have tables, and there's 4 students to each table, and they have a cup of just colored pencils on here. So we'll talk about how to split those colored pencils up in just a minute. And then I've got 4 different shading pencils. I have my lightest pencil that I have right now is an HB. You could also use a B for your lightest. My next lightest is a 2B. Then I have a 4B and a 6B. We're going to start by shading this box with graphite. I'm choosing this box because you can see 3 of the sides, so I want to show you how you would shade each of those different sides. So when we're shading, first we have to determine where the light is coming from. The light source does not have to be on the picture. I'm going to put the light source, let's say there's a sun right here, and that's our light source. If your light source is not on the page, that's fine, but you have to decide where is it. Is it just out of sight at the top? Is it to the left? Is it to the right? Those are things that you have to be thinking about to determine where your light and shadow is going to be. And a lot of this is just sort of critical thinking and determining that. So if the light is up here and it's coming this direction, and we're going to shade this box, first we have to decide what the lightest side would be. If the light is shining right down here, it's going to hit this side first. This side is going to be our lightest side. Then, to determine these 2 sides, sometimes, like in this case, it would really depend on if there were other objects that could reflect light onto it, but without getting that advanced right now, we're just going to kind of pick a side. I'm going to say that this side would be the next lightest, and then this side would be the darkest. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3. And then I'll show you how to draw a cast shadow. So if the sun is right here, it means that this is blocking the ground, and you cannot see, it's not going to be as lit here because there's going to be a shadow from the box that's sitting here. So there's several different ways that we can make values with graphite, and I'm going to show you some of those ways. My favorite way to create the lightest values is by using just a blending stump that has a little bit of graphite already on there. So I can press really lightly and get a really light value. I can press a little bit harder and get a little bit of a dark value. So even the pressure that you use with your blending stump can create lighter or darker values. If you have a brand new blending stump and it doesn't have any graphite on it, that's when you can use, I'm using a 6B right now, but that's when you can use your scrap paper. You can just color a little bit. Take your blending stump and get some of the graphite onto it that way. But if you've done that, know that it's got like brand new graphite. There's kind of a lot on it. You may want to test your blending stump on a separate piece of paper just to see how dark it's going to be before you start using it, because you don't want to be surprised. Also, sometimes like blending stumps can be really fickle. When you turn it different ways, like sometimes, like right now, I'm not getting a soft mark like I was getting over here. So you may want to test it on a scrap piece of paper and see like what's the best way to turn it. Like now that I've rotated it this way, I'm getting that soft value again. So I'm going to keep it like that in my hand. And I'm just going to lightly color in the top. You could leave it white, but I want you to practice making the lightest value that you can make. If you didn't have a blending stump, that's when I probably would have used the HB or the 2B and just colored as lightly as possible. So there's different ways to create lighter and darker values. One is the type of pencil you use. Another way is the pressure that you use. So let's say I was using my HB pencil and that's what I used to make the lightest value. Like if you didn't have a blending stump and you were just using pencils. So if you want it to be smooth, you can lay it a little bit more on its side like this and just press really lightly. And I would practice a little bit and even maybe get kind of a flat side before you move to your box. If you angle it more like this, how you're used to holding a pencil, you're gonna get more lines in your shading. Sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. If you're trying to make it smooth, or if you're gonna blend with a Q-tip, I would turn it on its side and try to get kind of a flat, even tone. So that's how I would use the HB if I was using that to make my lightest value instead of the blending stump. For our second darkest side, I'm going to use the 2B pencil, and that's going to be this one. And I'm just going to color this whole side. I may color a little bit on my scrap paper just so that I can get a flat edge to the graphite, and then I'm going to move it over to my paper without rotating it. I'm going to try to, because I'm trying to make everything nice and smooth, I'm going to color it kind of in the same direction, and I'm coloring in like little ovals. But sometimes if it's not going to make it too dark, you can layer it to hide some of those marks and to make it a more even flat tone. So like right now, I'm coloring kind of in little vertical ovals. I can kind of angle it and do like diagonal ovals on top of it to hide some of the marks. Something else to think about, if you have anything under your paper, if you've got little like eraser crumbles, or if you have a textured table, like someone has used an X-Acto knife and cut things up and made marks in the table, those marks will show up on your paper when you're shading. It'll pick it up underneath it. So right now I have a piece of paper underneath here, and that's going to kind of prevent anything like that from happening. So just be aware of that. So we talked about how you can change lightness and darkness of your graphite by selecting one pencil over another pencil. Like a 2B is lighter than a 4B. And then we also talked about pencil pressure. So the harder you press, the darker you can get. And then another way is layering. So if I did this whole side and decided it needed to be darker, I could just do another layer on top, and that would make it a little bit darker too. Also, when I blend this in with a blending stump, it's gonna darken it just a little bit. So right now it's already darker than that top face, and it's gonna darken it even more when I use the blending stump. So after I get the whole side shaded, I'm going to pick up my blending stump and I'm going to blend everything in so it's just a little bit smoother. If the box was textured and you wanted to show that, that's when you would use different types of marks, let some line work show through. But right now we're just going to focus on trying to get things smooth. So I used a blending stump on the top side. I used a 2B here, So now I'm going to use a 4B here. The 4B is a little bit darker than the 2B. And as I'm shading, I'm just comparing it to the 2B just to make sure it's a little bit darker. And as long as it's just a little bit darker, it's going to darken up some more when I use that blending stump. When you're shading, if you see like any little spots that's missing graphite, you can kind of rotate your pencil so that you have more of the point and you can kind of control where you're putting the graphite very specifically, and you can fill that in just a little bit before you go in and blend it. That's going to be a little bit more important when you're using colored pencils, because they don't necessarily, when you burnish those, they don't necessarily fill in those gaps as well as the blending stump does with the colored pen or with the graphite. But just one more thing to be aware of. Okay, so now I'm going to use the blending stump to smooth it all out. The last thing we're going to do is use our darkest pencil, the 6B, to create a cast shadow, a shadow cast by this object. It is blocking the light. So I'm looking at sort of the angle in which the sun is angled towards this box, and I'm sort of just imagining where those lines would be based on that. The thing is, a lot of times artists will make decisions to change certain things compositionally. Like they may decide to change and alter this line because they want the angle to be different because it creates a better movement or a better flow in their composition. And the average person isn't going to notice something that's altered just a little bit as long as the world still feels like it makes sense with light and shadow. So we don't have to be super, super accurate, but we do know that it's going to be going mostly this direction. So I'm going to start with the 6B and press a little bit harder right next to the object. And then as I move away from it, I may press a little bit lighter. It's going to create a nice contrast next to the object. When you have something that like really light next to something really dark, that's high contrast. We don't have the light side down here, but we can still create a decent amount of contrast. So I'm gradually pressing lighter and lighter as I move away from the box. And I'm also layering it less. I'm still layering it, I'm going on top of it, but I'm every time I layer it here, I'm kind of going back in and layering it some more over here. There's a spot where I felt like I needed to fill that in. I rotated my pencil to get a sharper tip and filled that in. You can play around with whether you want shadows with really strong defined edges or if you want soft diffused shadows. That's totally up to you. You can always go back with your eraser too if you want to create a stronger line and kind of clean up some of that. It may be better to blow the eraser crumbles away so I don't smear what I just sort of cleaned up, or you can kind of tap your paper like that to get them off. All right, let's move into colored pencil. So I'm going to do this box in colored pencil for the same reason. It has 3 sides, and I want to show you 3 different sides. So this is what I tell the kids in my class, because they have a table of 4 and they're all kind of sharing these colors. I want each of you to choose a pair of analogous colors. So we haven't gone over color theory yet in this class, so they don't know what analogous colors mean, probably. Some of them might. Analogous colors means they're next to each other on the color wheel, and they look very similar. So red and red-orange are next to each other on the color wheel. So that is a pair that one person can grab. And it's gonna roll. Okay. And orange and yellow, they're pretty close. If I had a yellow-orange, that would be better, but I don't. So orange and yellow, that's a good pair to use. I think in my class, I also have a pink and a raspberry. That may work better than the yellow-orange pair. This may be a little tricky. Yellow is hard to layer, so that might be a little bit harder. Yellow, green, and green. It's especially harder to layer when it's more of a cheap color pencil and not like a really nice artist grade. So this is probably the last choice. I've got a blue and a purple that could be paired together. You could also pair one of these with a black, or you could pair one of these with a brown, and that tends to work too. Okay, so I'm gonna use the, let's do the blue and the purple. That's what I'll do. Okay, so things that we learned. Actually, let's talk about colored pencils first. So one thing that most beginning students don't know is burnishing. Burnishing really just means that you are laying down enough color, enough of the colored pencil in the product, that you're getting like a really rich, complete opaque layer. And you can get this look in a couple of different ways. So let's go through how to do that. So one, you can color with the same color and continue to layer and continue to press harder and harder until you've basically burnished it with that one color. Another way you can burnish is by using a colorless blender. So I'm going to take the same blue and I'm going to color it. And you got to make sure that you do have an even application of color. Like you don't have any holes, or those will show up when you burnish it. So I've colored it about that much. I'm going to take my colorless blender. Also, well, I'll show you that in a minute. Colorless blender. And blend that. When you use this, it allows you not to make it as dark. So if you didn't want it to get that dark and you like that look of like the light value of the color, this helps you keep some of that. It does get a little bit darker after you use it. So something to be aware of when you use a colorless blender. Someone else may have used it recently, like I just did, and it may have some blue on it or whatever color they used. So another reason to have a scrap paper nearby is to kind of color it, get any of the old color off of it. And another way to burnish is by choosing another color to layer it with and burnish with. And that depends on sort of what your aim is. So let's say I want a really, really light blue, and that got too dark when I added the colorless blender. I may want to burnish it with a white. The cheaper colors, like, don't tend to burnish as well, especially with the white. The more artist grade pencils are going to burnish a little bit better when you're using white. And you can also layer it with another color. So today we're going to be layering colors that are analogous, but they don't have to be next to each other. So let's see what happens when we go back and forth with the blue and the purple. So let's say I was using the purple. Purple's a little bit darker than blue. So this may be what I do for my darker side. So I'm going back and forth, layering, and I'm gradually increasing pressure, because if I just suddenly increase the pressure with the purple, then this is going to end up being purple. But if I want it to be more of a bluish purple and I'm trying to blend them evenly together, then I have to gradually increase the pressure and go back and forth to do that. If you want to and you have the time to, you can play around with what happens when you blend and burnish colors together that aren't necessarily analogous. So like blue and orange, they're on opposite sides of the color wheel. We're not going to do this today, but I'm just going to kind of show you that this can happen. You can do this. So I'm going to do a layer of blue, a layer of orange, and I'm going to keep going back and forth, and we'll kind of see what we get. It may be worth your time to make a little chart in your sketchbook and just label. Like you could do a list of the colors on the top, a list of the colors on the side, and then like however, when they layer them, what do they look like? Because later on you may want that color. Technically, like if you were to mix blue and orange paint, it's gonna look brown. I don't know that I would call this brown though. It's kind of an interesting gray. And different brands of colored pencils are gonna look different when you blend them together. So that may be a fun thing to do in your free time, just so that you're aware of what colors that we have. Okay, so let's use what we've learned with burnishing to shade this box. So if I'm going with blue and purple, first determine which of your colors has the lighter value. Blue, in this case, is going to be a lighter value than this purple. If you have these greens, this is lighter value than this is. If you're in my class and you have pink and raspberry, the pink is the lighter value. Red and red-orange, red is the darker value, red-orange is the lighter value. And then if you have yellow and orange, yellow is the lighter value. So we're gonna start by coloring the lightest side. If the sun is coming from here, this is gonna be the lightest side. So grab your lightest color, whether it's blue or red-orange or yellow-green or pink. And we're going to put very little pressure. You may wanna get a flat side on your scrap paper and you wanna turn it kind of sideways. And you're gonna color very, very lightly. Because we only need to get 3 values, they can be pretty different. So if I needed to get like 8 different values, they would have to step up a little bit slower. I'd have to leave more room for variation. So if I was doing 8 different values, I might burnish this side with a white. But I think because I only have to do 3 different values and it's going to be pretty easy to make 3 different values, I'm going to burnish this with a colorless blender because I like the way that looks better. When I color with the colorless blender, I'm coloring in different directions. Not just always vertical or always horizontal, to try to get a smoother look. And I'm coloring in little circles or little ovals. I'm not coloring in lines like up, down, up, down. I'm coloring in little circles. I'm also giving it a decent amount of pressure. Out of these 2 sides, I'm going to make, and you could go either way, honestly, because if there was light reflecting from the ground, this side might be a little bit lighter than this side, but I'm going to choose to make this side the lightest, this one the next darkest, and then this one the darkest. And I don't think the viewer is going to question that, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to burnish this with both of these 2, but I'm going to lean more towards the blue. And I may not burnish, I may actually finish the burnishing with the colorless blender to keep it a little bit lighter. But introducing that purple is going to darken the value just a little bit. I'm also pressing a little bit harder with the color before I use the colorless blender. So I'm coloring in different directions to kind of hide those marks and keep it smooth. Now that I have a layer of blue, I'm going to do a layer of purple on top. And I'm trying to give an even pressure so that it shows up, but it doesn't kind of take over the blue. It's still blending with the blue. If I press too hard, the purple's going to take over. And when you've got an even plane of color, that's when I'm going to take the colorless blender and go over that to burnish it. And for the last side, I'm just going to use the blue and purple, and I'm going to layer back and forth with them, pressing harder and harder each time until it's burnished, and that will be my darkest layer. One thing to note though, if you are pressing really, really hard at the beginning, too hard, you're not going to get an application of the other color on top in a clean way. You're going to see a lot of lines and kind of scratches, and it's just not gonna adhere well. So you don't want to get too dark too fast with the first color. You may also want to lean heavier on your darker value. Like I might lean heavier on my purple in order to create a darker value. And if you're really struggling, I hate suggesting this with the pencils, but if you're really struggling, you could do, I'll see if I can make it happen. I may ruin everything. You can try a layer of black. It's not going to work as well with the yellow and the orange. Just slip a layer of black in there. If you do that though, make sure you don't have a really sharpened point. You don't want like black streaks all the way through. So I'm going to shade my scrap over here so I can get a flat edge. And just kind of sneak a layer of black in there. You don't want too much black because that can flatten out your artwork. Like if you just use black for your shadows, because most shadows have some color in them. But if you just want to add one little layer of black in there every now and then to blend that in with your color, just to increase the darkness of your value, you can. Okay, I'm going to go in with my purple now, and I'm going to press pretty hard to finish off the burnishing. The goal of this exercise was for you to learn, one, how light can affect the way an object looks. So I want you to apply everything that you've learned by choosing one of your perspective drawings that you did, and I want you to shade it or color it. So you can choose to do the whole thing in just pencil, or you can choose to do it in color pencil. And if you do it in color pencil, you don't have to just use two colors, but you've learned how they kind of work together, and you can apply a darker color to a lighter color in order to change the value, which is what I wanted you to learn. So first you're going to determine, where is your light source? Are you going to draw it on your paper? Like, am I going to just draw a sun right here? Or is it going to be off the paper somewhere and I don't want to add it, but I know it's over here? So let's say I put the sun over here. That means that this side of the house is going to be lighter than this side of the house. So I will color or shade that accordingly. And then other things you may just have to kind of critically think about. You may have to think about how your driveway and this area is going to be lit, but you're going to have some shadow in the grass back here because the light's not hitting that grass because the sun's in the way. It also depends on where the sun is in the sky. Also, when we were drawing the boxes and shading the boxes in, the texture of the boxes we imagined to be smooth, so we were coloring everything smoothly. But you may want some marks to show up if you're doing like bushes or grass. Think about the direction that you color. So if I want the grass to look like short little marks like this, I can kind of make those marks. Sometimes it's easier to lay like a flat base of color and then do the texture on top. It's not going to show up if it's the exact same color though. So if I color all the grass with this color and then I do the texture on top like this, it may or may not show up as well. I have to change the value of the color or change the color entirely. Other things to think about: if you have windows, you may have additional light sources. So even though this side is light and this side is a little darker, if the sun is coming from this side, you may have some light in your window if you choose there to be a light on. So that's something else to think about. So you're doing a lot of thinking. Be aware of all the choices that you make, what values you use, the pressure that you're using, or what colors you're using. These are all decisions that you're constantly making while you're working on your drawing, and you need to be very aware of them. So I hope you were able to learn a bit about how to create the different values, about how the light works, and I would love to see pictures of what you've done in the comments.